So the next one is from Dustfinger's point of view after Maggie's. Lame. I was ready to get back to Eleanor. But let's recap what happened last. We were from... Oh, the last chapter we read was from Eleanor's point of view. That's why it's gonna be a minute. Duh. Oh, right. She had, like, left them. She left a note saying she was gonna go get help. She's going to the police. Like, the police could do anything, right? But you know Eleanor. She's pretty stubborn. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But this chapter's... Oh, I wonder how loud this is. Oops, I think that's right. Once Upon a Time reality TV show. This excerpt is from the Book of Merlin by T.H. White. Woke him with words, their cruel, bright weapons. That's it. And the chapter's called The Magpie, which most of us should know is Capricorn's mom. So it's going to be about her. It was still quite early when Maggie heard Basta's voice out in the corridor. She hadn't touched the breakfast one of the maids had brought them. When she asked what had happened last night, what the shots meant, the girl had just stared at her, terrified, and shook her head, and scurried out the door. She probably thought Maggie was a witch. Finoglio hadn't eaten any breakfast either. He was writing. He wrote and wrote without stopping, filling sheet after sheet of paper, tearing up what he'd written, beginning again, putting one sheet aside and starting another, frowning, crumpling up the paper, and starting once more. Hours and hours passed like this, until there were only 3 sheets of paper he hadn't torn up. Just 3. At the sound of Basta's voice, he hastily hid them under his mattress, kicking the crumpled pieces of paper under the bed with his foot. "Quick, Maggie, help me get them under the bed," he whispered. "He mustn't find any, not a single one." Maggie obeyed, but all she could think about was why Basta was here. Was he going to tell her something? Did he want to see her face when he told her not to expect Mo anymore? Finoglio had sat down at the table again in front of a blank sheet of paper and was rapidly scribbling a few words on it when the door opened. Maggie held her breath as if that would hold back the words that were about to come out of Basta's mouth and stab her in the heart. Finoglio put down his pen and went to stand beside her. "What is it?" he asked. "I'm to fetch her," said Basta. "Mortola wants to see her." He sounded angry, as if it were beneath his dignity to carry out such a trivial task. Mortola, the magpie? Maggie looked at Finoglio. What did this mean? But the old man only shrugged his shoulders, at a loss. "This little pigeon's supposed to take a look at what she's to read this evening," Basta explained, so she won't stumble over the words like Darius and spoil everything. That's ironic. He beckoned impatiently to Maggie. "Come on." Maggie took a step toward him, but then stopped. "First, I want to know what happened last night," she asked. "I heard shots." "Oh, that," Basta smiled. His teeth were almost as white as his shirt. "I've an idea for your father was planning to visit you, but Cockrell wouldn't let him in." Maggie stood there as if rooted to the spot. Basta took her arm and pulled her roughly away from him. Finoglio tried to follow them, but Basta slammed the door in his face. Finoglio called something after her, but Maggie couldn't hear what it was. There was a rushing sound in her ears, as if she were listening to her own blood running far too fast through her veins. He managed to get away. If that makes you feel it... Oh, he's talking. Y'all just ignore me when I'm stupid. "He managed to get away, if that makes you feel any better," said Basta, shoving her toward the staircase. "Not that that means much, come to think of it. When Cockrell shoots at the cats, they seem to dodge the bullets, too. He's such a useless shot. But they're usually found dead in a corner somewhere later." Maggie kicked a shin with all her might and raced away down the stairs. But Basta soon caught up with her. His face distorted with pain, he grabbed her by the hair and hauled her in front of him. "Don't you try that again, sweetheart," he hissed. "You can think yourself lucky you're the main attraction at our festivities this morning, or I'd wring your skinny little neck here and now." Meggie did not try it again. Even if she had wanted to, she wouldn't have had the chance. Basta kept hold of her hair, pulling her along behind him as if she were a disobedient dog. The pain brought tears to Maggie's eyes, but she kept her face turned away so Basta couldn't see them. He took her down to the cellars. She hadn't been to this part of Capricorn's house before. The ceiling was even lower than the one on the shed where she, Mo, and Eleanor had first been imprisoned. The walls were whitewashed, just like the walls in the upper stories of the house, and there were just as many doors. Most of them looked as if it had been a long time since they'd been opened, and heavy padlocks hung in front of some of them. Maggie thought of the safes Dustfinger had talked about, and the gold Mo had brought tumbling into Capricorn's church. They didn't get him, she thought. Of course not. The man with the limp doesn't shoot well. Basta said so himself. At last, they stopped outside a door. It was made of different wood than the other doors down here. Wood with a beautiful grain like a tiger's coat that shimmered with a tinge of red under the naked electric light bulbs in the lit cellar. "And let me tell you," Basta whispered to Maggie before he knocked on the door, "if you're as impertinent to Mortola as you are to me, she'll leave you on one of those nets in the church until you're so hungry you'll be gnawing at the ropes. Compared to her heart, mine's as soft as a little girl's cuddly toy." His peppermint-scented breath wafted into Maggie's face. She would never again be able to eat anything smelling of peppermint. The magpie's room was large enough to hold a dance in. The walls were red, like the walls in the church, but you couldn't see much of them. They were covered with photographs in gold frames, photographs of houses and people crammed close together on the walls, like a crowd in a space too small for it. In the middle, framed in gold like the photos but much larger, hung a portrait of Capricorn. Even skilled at his trade than the sculptor who had carved the statue at the church, Capricorn's features in the picture were rounder and softer than in real life, and his curiously feminine mouth lay like a strange fruit below the nose, which was a little too short and broad. It was only his eyes that the painter had caught perfectly. As cold as they were in the flesh, they looked down on Maggie like the eyes of a man examining a frog he is about to slit open to see what it looks like on the inside. No face, she had learned in Capricorn's village, is as terrifying as a face without pity. Reading chat like it's a book. Gotta come around this way. Ow. Could you scooch? Oof. This is decent. I need a freaking pillow. Can I steal yours? I could steal the one behind me, I guess, instead of taking hers. Sorry. This good. Don't be weird. Okay. The magpie sat, curiously rigid, in a green velvet armchair directly below her son's portrait. She looked accustomed to sitting down like a constantly busy woman who resented having to stop, but whose body forced her to rest. Maggie saw that the old woman's legs were swollen above her ankles. They bulged formlessly below her bony knees. Noticing her glance, I can't see over here. I don't like it. I'm too far up. I can see over here, but I lost my spot. Can you guys still hear me? all the way at the top. Noticing her glance, the magpie pulled the hem of her dress well down over those knees. Have you told her what she's here for? She found standing up difficult. Maggie watched her support herself with one hand on a little table, her lips pressed together. Basta seemed to enjoy her frailty. A smile played around his mouth until the magpie looked at him, wiping it away with a single icy glance. Impatiently, she beckoned Maggie over. Basta prodded her in the back when she didn't move. Come here, I want to show you something. With slow but firm steps, the magpie walked over to the chest of drawers that looked much too heavy for its gracefully curved legs. 2 lamps stood on it, their shades patterned with flowery tendrils. Between them was a wooden casket decorated all the way around with a pattern of tiny holes. When the magpie opened its lid, Maggie flinched back. 2 snakes, thin as lizards and not much longer than Maggie's lower arm, lay in the casket. I always keep my room nice and warm so this pair doesn't get too sleepy, explained the magpie, opening the top drawer of the chest and taking out a glove. It was made of a stout black leather, and it was so stiff that she had difficulty forcing her gnarled hand into it. Your friend Dustfinger played a nasty trick on poor Risa when he asked her to look for that book, she continued, reaching into the box and grasping one of the snakes firmly behind its flat head. Come here, she ordered Basta and held the wriggling snake out to him. Maggie saw from his face that everything in him felt revulsion, but he came closer and took the creature. He held the scaly body well away from him as it wound and twisted in the air. As you see, Basta doesn't care for my snakes, said the magpie with a smile. He never did, not that means much. As far as I know, Basta doesn't like anything but his knife. I'll be right back. I can't get comfy. Where'd it go? He held the scaly body well away from him as it wound and twisted in the air. As you see, Basta doesn't care for my snakes, said the magpie with a smile. He never did, not that means much. As far as I know, Basta doesn't like anything but his knife. He also believes that snakes bring bad luck, which of course is pure nonsense. Mortola handed Basta the second snake. Maggie saw the viper's tiny poison fangs when it opened his mouth. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for Basta. Well, don't you think this is a good hiding place? Asked the magpie, reaching into the casket yet again. This time she brought out a book. Maggie would have known what book it was, even if she hadn't recognized the colored jacket. I've often kept valuables in this casket, continued the magpie. No one knows about it and its contents apart from Basta and Capricorn. Poor Risa searched high and low for this book. She's a brave creature, but she didn't get as far as my casket. As it happens, she likes snakes. I've never met anyone who feels less fear of them than Risa. Although she's been bitten now and then, isn't that so, Basta? The magpie took off her glove and looked scornfully at him. Basta likes to use snakes to scare women who reject his advances. It didn't work with Risa. How did it go exactly? Didn't she finally put the snake outside your door, Basta? Rude. Basta did not reply. The snakes were still twisting and turning in his hands. One of them had wound its tail around his arm. Put them back in the casket, the magpie ordered, but be careful not to hurt them. Then she returned to her armchair with the book. Sit down, she said, pointing to the footstool beside her. Maggie obeyed. Surreptitiously, she looked around her. Mortola's room reminded her of a fairy tale treasure chest filled to the brim, but there was too much of everything. Too many golden candlesticks, too many lamps, rugs, pictures, vases, china ornaments, silk flowers, gilded bells. The magpie looked at her smugly. In her plain black dress, she sat there like a cuckoo that has forced its way into another bird's nest. A fine room for a domestic servant, don't you think? she said with satisfaction. Capricorn knows how to value me. But he still makes you live in the cellar, replied Meggie. Even though you're his mother, if only words could be swallowed. Cotton slipped quickly What? Even though you're his mother, if only words could be swallowed, Cotton slipped back quickly between your lips. The magpie looked at her with such hatred that Meggie already felt the woman's bony fingers on her throat. But Martola just sat there, her bird-like eyes looking fixedly at Meggie. Who told you that? The old sorcerer? Meggie clamped her lips together and looked at Basta, but he... What? I keep losing my spot. I suck today. This is every day. He probably hadn't heard a word. He was just putting the second snake back in the casket. Did he know Capricorn's little secret? Before she could wonder about that anymore, Mortola put the book on her lap. A word about this to anyone here, or indeed anyone anywhere else, hissed the magpie, and I personally will prepare your next meal. A little extract of monkshood, and a few shoots of yew, or perhaps a couple of hemlock seeds in the sauce. How do you fancy that? I can assure you, you'd find it a hard meal to digest. Now start reading. Meggie stared at the book on her lap. When Capricorn held it up in the church, she hadn't been able to make out the picture on the jacket. Now she had had a chance to see it at a close range. There was a landscape in the background that looked like a slightly different version of the hills surrounding Capricorn's village. But the foreground showed a black heart surrounded by red flames. Go on, open it, snapped the magpie. Meggie obeyed. She opened the book at the page beginning with the N, and the horned marten perched on it. How long ago was it that she had said in Eleanor's library, looking at the same page? An eternity, a whole lifetime? Wrong page, go on, said the magpie. Find the page with the corner turned down. Wordlessly, Meggie obeyed. There was no picture on that page or the one opposite it. Without thinking, she smoothed out the corner with her thumbnail. Mo hated to see dog-eared pages. What's the idea? Do you want to make it difficult for me to find the place again? Hissed the magpie. Begin with the second paragraph, but mind you, don't read aloud. I don't want to find the shadow here in my room. How far should I go? I mean, how far am I to read this evening? How should I know? The magpie leaned over and rubbed her left leg. How long does it usually take you to read your fairies and tin soldiers and so forth out of their stories? Meggie lowered her head. Poor Tinkerbell. I can't say, she murmured. It depends. Sometimes it happens soon, sometimes not until after many pages, sometimes not at all. Well, read the whole chapter. That ought to be enough. And you can leave out the not at all business. The magpie rubbed her other leg. They were both wrapped in bandages that could be seen through the dark stockings she wore. What are you staring at? She snapped at Meggie. Could you read me something out of a book to do my legs good? Do you know a story with the cure for old age and death in it? Little witch that you are? No, whispered Meggie. Then don't gawp so stupidly. Look at the book. Mind you notice every word. I don't want to hear you stumble once tonight. No stammering, no mispronunciations. Understood? This time Capricorn is to get exactly what he wants. I will see to that. You guys are going dark. Meggie let her eyes wander over the letters. She wasn't taking in a word of what she read. She could think of nothing but Mo and shots fired in the night. But she pretended to be reading on, while Martola never took her eyes off her. Finally, she raised her head and closed the book. Finished, she said. What, already? The magpie looked at her suspiciously. Meggie did not reply. She glared at Basta. He was leaning on Martola's armchair, looking bored. I'm not going to read that aloud this evening, she said. You shot my father last night. Basta told me. I won't read a word. The magpie turned to Basta. What's the idea of that? She asked angrily. Do you think the child will read better if you break her silly heart? Tell her you missed him and get on with it. Basta lowered his head like a boy caught doing wrong by his mother. I did tell her. Well, almost, he growled. Cockerel's a terrible shot. Your father didn't suffer so much as a scratch. Maggie closed her eyes with relief. She felt warm and wonderful. Everything was all right, or at least what wasn't all right soon would be. Happiness made her bold. There's something else, she said. Why should she be afraid? They needed her. She was the only one who could read that wretched shadow out of the book for them. No one else could do it, except Mo, and they hadn't caught him yet. They would never catch him now, ever. What is it? The magpie smoothed her sternly pinned-up hair. What had she looked like when she was Maggie's age? Had her lips been so mean even then? I will read only if I can see Dustfinger again. She did not end the sentence. What for? Because I want to tell him we're going to try to save him, and because I think my mother is with him, thought Maggie. But naturally, she did not say so out loud. I want to tell him I'm sorry, she replied instead. After all, he helped us. Mortola's mouth twisted mockingly. How touching, she said. I only want to see her once. Close up, thought Maggie. Perhaps it isn't her after all. Perhaps. Suppose I say no. The magpie was watching her like a cat playing with a young and inexperienced mouse. But Maggie had been expecting that question. Then I will bite my tongue, she said. I will bite it so hard that it swells right up and I won't be able to read aloud this evening. The magpie leaned back in her chair and laughed. Hear that, Basta. The child is no fool. Basta only grunted, but Mortola studied Maggie almost benevolently. I'll tell you something. Yes, you can have your silly little wish, but about this evening. Before you read, I want you to have a good look at my photographs. Maggie glanced around. Look at them closely. Do you see all those faces? Every one of those people made an enemy of Capricorn, and none of them was ever heard from again. The houses you see in the photographs are no longer standing either, not one of them. They have all been burned down. Think of those photos when you're reading, little witch. Should you stumble over the words or get any silly notions about simply holding your tongue, then your face will soon be looking out one of these pretty gold frames too. But if you do well, we'll let you go back to your father. Why not? Read like the angel tonight, and you'll see him again. I've been told that his voice clothes every word in silk and satin, turns it into flesh and blood, and that's how you are to read aloud. Not uncertainly and stammering like that fool Darius. Do you understand? That's how I read. Maggie looked at her. I understand, she said quietly, although she knew for certain that the magpie was lying. They would never let her go back to Mo. He would have to come and get her. That's one chapter. The book is attacking me. Okay, the next one is from Dustfinger's point of view, which means maybe it'll have Risa in it, who might be Maggie's mom. Ooh, sleepy. Come on, girls. Wait. Y'all having fun yet? Can I take this down? Probably not. It still looks pretty bright back there. God, why? Why does it seem to be brighter during, like, later? It doesn't really make sense. It's like every day. Okay. Y'all having fun? can hear, right? Whoa. We're on chapter 49. Oh my God. Basta's pride and Dustfinger's cunning. This excerpt is from The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. A lot of stuff happening, yes, about the end. Still I wonder if we shall ever be put into songs or tales. We're in one, of course, but I mean put into words, you know? Told by the fireside, or read out of a great big book with red and black letters, years and years afterwards. Lilac, I feel like you're stuck to my lip balm right now, I swear to God. And people will say, let's hear about Frodo and the ring. And they'll say, yes, that's one of my favorite stories. Oh, I remember that part. Oh, they were all sad. Sam. Basta was grumbling to himself non-stop as he escorted Meggie over to the church. What? Where did I go? Bite her tongue, would she, since when has the old woman fallen for that kind of thing? And who has taken this little madam to the crypt? Oh, and who has to take this little madam to the crypt? Basta, of course. What am I supposed to be? The only male maid servant in this place? Crypt. Meggie had thought the prisoners were still in the net, but she could see no trace of them when she and Basta entered the church. And Basta had impatiently pushed her past the columns. Yes, the crypt, he spat. Where you put the dead and those who soon will be. Down here, get on with it. I've got better things to do today than babysit Miss Silvertongue. The stairs to which he was pointing were steep and led down into darkness. The treads were worn and so uneven that Meggie stumbled at every other step. Down below it was so dark that she first didn't realize the staircase had come to an end, and she was feeling for the next step with her foot when Basta pushed her roughly forward. What's the idea now? She heard him say with a curse. Why's the damn lantern out again? A match flared and Basta's face appeared out of the darkness. Visitor for you, Dustfinger, he announced derisively as he lit the lantern. Silvertongue's little girl wants to say goodbye. Her father brought you into this world, and his daughter will make sure you leave it again tonight. I wouldn't have let her come. What is this freaking... Is it my hair? I wouldn't have let her come, but the magpie's going soft in her old age. The child actually seems fond of you. It can hardly be your pretty face, can it? Basta's laugh echoed unpleasantly back from the damp walls. Meggie went up to the grating behind which Dustfinger stood. She looked at him only briefly, gazed over his shoulder. Capricorn's maid was sitting on a stone coffin. The lantern Basta had lit gave only a dim light, but it was enough for Meggie to recognize her face. It was the face from Mo's photograph, except that the hair surrounding it was darker now, and there was no sign of any smile. As Meggie came closer to the grating, her mother lifted her head and was now looking at her as if nothing in the world existed. Ridiculous. Oh my God, from the Beastly Orcs. She's snoring. Ah! It's getting darker in here. Okay. My freaking sleeves keep falling down. Where did we go? I'm just going to start over here. Meggie went up to the grating behind which Dustfinger stood. She looked at him only briefly, then gazed over his shoulder. Capricorn's maid was sitting on a stone coffin. The lantern Basta had lit gave only a dim light, but it was enough for Meggie to recognize her face. It was the face from Mo's photograph, except that the hair surrounding it was darker now, and there was no sign of any smile. As Meggie came closer to the grating, her mother lifted her head and was looking at her as if nothing else in the world existed. Mortola let her come here, said Dustfinger. That's hard to believe. The girl threatened to bite her own tongue. Basta was still standing on the stairs, playing with the rabbit's foot he wore around his neck as a lucky charm. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Meggie was speaking to Dustfinger, but as she spoke, she looked at her mother, who was still sitting on the stone coffin. What for? Dustfinger smiled a strange smile. For what I must do this evening. For reading aloud from the book. If only she could have let the two of them know Finoglio's plan. Right, now you've said your piece, barked Basta impatiently. Come on, the air down here could make your voice hoarse. But Meggie did not turn. She clung to the bars of the grating as firmly as she could. No, she said, I want to stay a bit longer. Perhaps she could think of a way to tell them. Some apparently innocent remark. I read something else out of a story, she told Dustfinger. A tin soldier. Did you, though? Dustfinger was smiling again. It was odd, but this time his smile seemed to her neither mysterious nor supercilious. Well, nothing can go wrong this evening, then can it? He was looking at her thoughtfully, and Meggie tried to tell him with her eyes, We're going to rescue you. It won't work out the way Capricorn expects, believe me. Dustfinger was still looking at her, trying to understand. He raised his eyebrows inquiringly and then turned to Basta. And how's that fairy, Basta? He asked. Still alive, is she, or has your company done her in? Meggie saw her mother get up and come toward her, walking tentatively, as if she were treading on broken glass. She's still alive, said Basta sullenly, tinkling all the time. I can't get a wink of sleep. If she carries on like that, I'm going to tell Flatnose to wring her neck, the way he does the pigeons when they poo on his car. My God. Meggie saw her mother take a piece of paper from the pocket of her dress and surreptitiously press it into Dustfinger's hand. That would mean at least 10 years bad luck for you both, said Dustfinger. Take my word for it. I know about fairies. Oh, watch out. What's that in front of you? Basta leaped back as if something had bitten his toes. Quick as a lash, Dustfinger's hand came through the grating and gave Meggie the note. Damn it, there's nothing there, swore Basta. Don't try that again, you hear me? He turned just as Meggie's fingers were closing around the paper. A note, eh? Well, well. Meggie tried in vain to keep her hand closed, but it was easy enough for Basta to pry her fingers apart. Then he stared at her mother's tiny writing. Read it. Go on, he growled, holding the note in front of her eyes. Meggie shook her head. Read it. Basta's voice was dangerously low. Or do you want me to carve a pretty pattern on your face like your friends here? Go on, read it, Meggie, said Dustfinger. He knows I like a good drop of wine anyway. Wine? Basta laughed. You wanted the child to get you some wine. How did you think she'd do that? Meggie stared at the real note. She concentrated on every word until she knew it by heart. 9 years is a long time. I celebrated all your birthdays. You're even lovelier than I imagined you. She heard Basta laughing. Just like you, Dustfinger, he said. You think I could drown your fears in drink, but a whole cask of wine wouldn't be enough for that. You guys went dark. I don't want to lose it. She always starts snoring. I know she really does. Monster balls. You're ridiculous. Colin. Okay. Just like you, Dustfinger, he said. You think you could drown your fears in drink, but a whole cask of wine wouldn't be enough for that. Dustfinger shrugged his shoulders. It was worth a try. Perhaps he looked a little too pleased when he said that, for Basta frowned and looked thoughtfully at his scarred face. On the other hand, he said slowly, you always were a crafty dog, and there are a lot of letters just for a bottle of wine. How about it, sweetheart? He held the note in front of Maggie again. Are you going to read it to me now, or should I show it to the magpie? Maggie snatched the note from him so fast that she had crumpled it behind her back while Basta was still wondering where it had gone. Give it here, you little brat, he hissed at her. Give me that note or I'll cut it out of your fingers. But Maggie retreated from him until her back was up against the grating. No, she said, clinging to the bars with one hand and pushing the note through them with the other. Dustfinger caught it at once. She felt him taking the paper from her fingers. Basta hit her in the face so hard that her head struck the grating. Immediately a hand stroked her hair, and when she looked around dazed, she was gazing into her mother's face. He'll notice at any moment, she thought. He'll understand it all. But Basta had eyes only for Dustfinger, who was waving the note back and forth behind the grating, as if he were brandishing a worm in front of a hungry bird's beak. Will you with me, or would you rather go on hitting little girls? Basta stood there motionless like a child whose ears had suddenly and unexpectedly been boxed. Then he seized Maggie's arm and dragged her toward him. She felt something cold on her throat. She didn't have to see it to know what it was. Her mother screamed and pulled at Dustfinger's hand, but he only held the note higher in the air. I knew it, he said. What a coward you are, Basta. You'd rather put a knife to a child's throat than venture in here. Of course, if Flatnose were here to back you up, too, with his broad back and his great fat fists, but he isn't. Come along, you're the one with the knife. I've got nothing but my hands, and you know how I hate to misuse them for fighting. Maggie felt Basta's grip relax, the blade no longer pressing into her skin. She swallowed and put a hand to her throat. She almost expected to feel warm blood, but there was none. Basta pushed her away so hard that she stumbled and fell on the damp, cold floor. Then he put his hand into his pants pocket and brought out a bunch of keys. He was painting with rage like a man who had run too far and too fast. He was panting with rage like a man who had run too far and too fast. Fingers trembling, he put a key into the lock of the cell. Dustfinger watched him, his face impassive. He gestured to Maggie's mother to step back from the grating and retreated himself, nimble as a dancer. You couldn't tell from his scarred face whether he was afraid or not, but the scars looked darker than usual. What's that for? He said when Basta came into the cell and held out his knife. You might as well put it away. If you kill me, you'll spoil Capricorn's fun. He won't forgive you for that in a hurry. Yes, he was afraid. Maggie could hear it in his voice. The words were spilling out of his mouth a little too fast. Who said anything about killing? Growled Basta as he closed the cell door behind him. Dustfinger retreated as far as the stone coffin. You were thinking of adding a few more decorations to my face, he was almost whispering. There was something else in his voice now, almost hatred. What? I don't know where I pulled out almost. Oh, it was like a bump. Oh, shit. It just says hatred, not almost. I could just read past all my mistakes and I just show y'all them like it really matters. There was something else in his voice now. Hatred, scorn, rage. Don't expect it to be so easy this time, he said softly. I've learned a few useful tricks since then. Have you indeed? Basta was standing barely a pace away from him. And what might be? Your friend Fire isn't here to help you. You don't even have that stinking Martin. It was his words I had in mind. Dustfinger had placed a hand on the coffin. You see, the fairies have taught me how to lay a curse on someone. They were sorry for my cut face, and they knew how bad I am at fighting. So I curse you, Basta. I curse you by the bones of the dead man lying in this coffin. I'll bet there's no old priest in it now, but someone you disposed of. Isn't that right? Basta did not answer, but his silence was more eloquent than any words. Of course, an old coffin like this makes a wonderful hiding place. Dustfinger caressed the cracked lid with his fingers, as if trying to call the dead back to life with the warmth of his hand. May his spirit haunt you, Basta, he said in a solemn voice. May he breathe my name in your ear at every step you take. Maggie saw Basta's hand leap to his rabbit's foot. That thing won't help you. Dustfinger's hand was still on the coffin. Poor Basta, aren't you feeling hot already? Do your limbs begin to tremble? I'm getting lightheaded. It's a lot to read. Oh my god. Wait, when is it? 2 more till this one. For fuck's sake, for real. Wild. I really want to read Eleanor's chapter, but then next time I'm going to be like, oh, I really want to read Eleanor's chapter, and it's going to be the same. It won't be till the end. And if I just read it till like here, I don't know, we'll just see. Because what's after that? That one's really short. Why is Farad's little pieces always so small? I like Farad. Fuck, where were we? No, my page. Oh, dear, limbs begin to tremble. Basta lunged at him with the knife, but Dustfinger, light on his feet as he was, avoided the blade. Fire is faster than you, Basta, he whispered. Much faster. Give me the note you handed her, Basta screamed in his face. Dustfinger just put the note in his pants pocket. Meggie stood motionless as a doll. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her mother put her hand in the pocket of her dress. When she brought it out again, she was holding a stone in it. A gray stone not much bigger than a bird's egg. Dustfinger passed his hands over the lid of the coffin, then held them out to Basta. Shall I touch you, he asked. What happens when you touch a murdered man's coffin? Tell me. You know all about such things. He took another step aside, like a dancer circling around his partner. I'll cut your filthy fingers off if you try to touch me, yelled Basta, his face red with rage. Every one of them, and your tongue into the bargain. He lunged with the knife again, cutting through the air with the bright blade, but Dustfinger avoided it. He was leaping around Basta faster and faster, ducking, retreating, advancing, but suddenly he found that his fearless stance had trapped him. He had only the bare wall behind him now, and the grating cutting off his retreat to the right, and Basta was coming straight at him. At the moment, Maggie's mother raised her hand. The stone hit Basta on the head. Astonished, he spun around, looked at her as if he was trying to remember who she was, and put his hand on his bleeding face. She never knew how Dustfinger did it, but suddenly he had Basta's knife in his hand. Basta was staring at his familiar blade in amazement, as if he couldn't grasp the fact that the faithless thing was pointing at his own chest. Well, how's this then? Dustfinger slowly brought the tip of the knife close to Basta's stomach. Do you feel how soft your flesh is? The human body is a fragile thing, and you can't get a new one. What is it you and your friends do to cats and squirrels? Flatnose likes describing it. What? Behave yourself during story time, for real, that. Why do you hear a frog? That's a good question. You guys, I'm sleepy for story time. Just want to replenish my oxygen supply back to my freaking brain. No Boston? What? To Boston? What? Y'all got problems, man. Okay, where were we? I don't hunt squirrels, Basta's voice cracked. He was trying not to look at the blade, now scarcely a hand's breadth from his snow-white shirt. No, so you don't. I remember now. It doesn't amuse you as much as it does the others. Basta's face was white. All the furious red had ebbed out of it. Fear is not red. Fear is pale as a dead man's face. What are you going to do now? He gasped. He was breathing hard, as if he were drowning. You don't think you'll get out of this village alive, do you? They'll shoot you down before you even cross the square. Well, I'd prefer that to meeting with the shadow, replied Dustfinger. Anyway, none of you are very good shots. Maggie's mother came up to him and mimed writing with her finger in the air. Dustfinger put his head in his pants pocket and gave her the note. His hand in his pants pocket and gave her the note. Basta followed the paper with his eyes, as if the strength of his gaze would draw it to him. Risa wrote something on it and handed it back to Dustfinger, who read what she had written, frowning. Wait until dark. No, I won't wait, but perhaps the girl had better stay here. He looks at Maggie. Capricorn won't harm her. After all, she's his new silver tongue. And sometime her father will try to get her. Dustfinger put the note away again and ran the tip of the knife down Basta's shirt buttons. They clinked as the metal touched them. You go to the stairs, Risa, he said. I'll finish off this business, and then we'll stroll across Capricorn Square and walk away like an innocent pair of lovers. Cautiously, Risa opened the cell door. She came out past the grating and took Maggie's hand. Her fingers were cold and rather rough, a stranger's fingers. But her face was familiar, although it had looked younger and less anxious in the photograph. Risa, we can't take her with us. Dustfinger seized Basta's arm and forced him back against the wall. Her father will murder me if she gets shot out there. Now turn around and cover your eyes, unless you want her to watch. The knife was trembling in his hand. Risa looked at him, horrified, and shook her head vigorously, but Dustfinger acted as if he didn't see her. You must thrust hard, dirty fingers, hissed Basta as he pressed his hands against the stone behind him. Killing isn't easy. You have to practice to do it well. Nonsense. Dustfinger grabbed him by the jacket and held the knife under his chin, the way Basta had pulled his knife on Mo that time in the church. Any fool can kill. It's easy as throwing a knife or throwing a book on the fire, breaking down a door, or frightening a child. Maggie began to tremble. She didn't know why. Her mother took a step toward the grating, but when she saw Dustfinger's stony face, she stopped. Then she turned, drew Maggie's face against her breast, put her arm around her, and held her tight. Her smell seemed familiar to Maggie, like something long forgotten. She closed her eyes and tried not to think of anything, not Dustfinger or the knife or Basta's face. And then for a terrible moment, there was only one thing in the world she wanted, to see Basta lying dead on the floor, limp as a doll, thrown away, an ugly, stupid toy that always seemed a little scary. The knife was barely a finger's breadth from Basta's shirt, but suddenly Dustfinger plunged his hand into Basta's pants pocket, took out the keys to the cells, and stepped back. No, you're right. I don't know much about killing, he said as he made his way backward out of the cell, and I'm not about to learn just for you. A scornful smile spread over Basta's face, but Dustfinger paid no attention. He locked the barred door, took Risa's arm, and led her to the stairs. Let go of her, he begged when she saw she was still holding Maggie tightly. Believe me, nothing will happen to her, and we can't take her with us. But Risa just shook her head and put her arm around Maggie's shoulders. Hey, Dustfinger, called Basta. I knew you couldn't do it. Give me the knife back. You don't know what to do with it anyway. Dustfinger ignored him. They'll kill you if you stay, he told Risa, but he let go of her hand. Hey, you up there, bellowed Basta. Help, help. The prisoners are escaping. Maggie looked at Dustfinger in alarm. Why didn't you gag him? With what, princess? Asked Dustfinger. Risa held Maggie close and stroked her hair. They'll shoot you, Basta's voice rang out. Hey there, help, he shouted again, shaking the bars of the grating. Peachy. It's kind of bright, I feel like. Can I remove this now? Sorry. I don't know if Luke was better with it. Well, he was the killer. Put more this away. That's all the way dark. That looks bad. Guess they'll just put it back up here. I don't know. Kind of seems to help. Oh my god! We have like a page left. Unless I read a whole another chapter. I lost where I was again. Oh, I was at the beginning of the page. He was shaking the bars of the grating. Footsteps were heard overhead. Dustfinger swore quietly, cast Risa one last glance, and then turned and ran up the worn steps. Maggie couldn't hear whether or not he got the door open at the top. She could hear nothing but Basta shouting. And she ran back toward him, helpless but wanting to strike him through the bars, right in his bellowing face. Once again, she heard footsteps overhead, muffled cries. What were they to do? Someone came crashing down the stairs. Was Dustfinger coming back? No, it wasn't his face, but Flatnose's that emerged from the darkness. Another of Capricorn's men was stumbling down the stairs behind him. He looked very young, round-faced and beardless. He immediately pointed his gun at Maggie and her mother. "Hello there, Basta. What are you doing behind those bars?" asked Flatnose, surprised. "Open up, you damn fool," snapped Basta through the grating. "Dustfinger's gone." "Dustfinger?" Flatnose wiped his face on his sleeve. "Then the lad here was right. Came to me just now and said he'd seen the fire eater up there behind a column." "And you didn't give a chase? Are you really as big a fool as you look?" Basta pressed his face to the bar as if he could make his way through them. "Hey, watch what you say, okay?" Flatnose came up to the grating and studied Basta with obvious pleasure. "So that dirty-fingered fellow has outwitted you again. Capricorn won't like that." "Send someone after him," roared Basta, or I'll tell Capricorn it was you who let him go." Flatnose took a handkerchief out of his pants pocket and noisily blew his nose. "Oh yes, so who's behind the bars, you or me? He won't get far. There are 2 guards in the parking area, another 3 in the square, and his face is easily recognizable. You made good sure of that, right?" His laughter sounded like a dog barking. "Tell you what, I could really get used to this sight. Your face looks good behind bars. They're just the thing to stop you from waving your knife around under anyone's nose." "Will you unlock this damn door?" bellowed Basta, "or I'll cut off your ugly nose. Open up." Flatnose folded his arms. "Sadly, I can't." He smirked in a mock-serious voice. "Our dirty-fingered friend seems to have taken the keys. Or do you see them anywhere?" He inquired of the boy who was still pointing his gun at Maggie and her mother. When he shook his head, Flatnose grinned all over his squashed face. "No, he can't see them either. Well, I suppose I'll just have to go to Mortola. Maybe she has a master key." "Wipe that grin off your face," shouted Basta, "or I'll carve it off." "You don't say. I can't see the knife anywhere." "I can't see your knife anywhere. Has Dustfinger stolen another one? If this goes on, he'll soon have a whole collection." Flatnose turned his back on Basta and pointed to the cell next to him. "Shut the woman in there and guard her till I get back with the keys," he said. "I'll just take little Miss Silvertongue back to her room first." Maggie resisted as he pulled her away, but Flatnose simply picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. "What was the girl doing down here anyway?" he asked. "Does Capricorn know about it?" "Ask the magpie," spat Basta. "No fear," Flatnose muttered as he marched toward the stairs with Maggie. She had time to see the boy push her mother into the other cell with the barrel of his gun. Then she saw only the steps and the door of the church and the dusty square as Flatnose carried her across it like a sack of potatoes. "Let's hope your voice isn't as thin as you," he grunted as he put her down on her feet outside the room. Or the shadow will be rather narrow-chested, as if he really does turn up this evening. Maggie did not answer. When Flatnose unlocked the door, she walked past Finoglia without a word, climbed up on her bed, and buried her head in Mo's sweater. We could stop here, or we could read Eleanor's part. It's 5 pages. Which really means like 10 pages. Yeah. Which is like 20 minutes. So we could read to like a little bit after 4 right now, or I could just stop. Sleepy. Maybe we should stop. There's only 2 chapters though. I feel like we didn't read for that long.